Hi there, Sean back with you from Steady Harbor Counseling. Welcome to part two of acting our way to improve mental performance. So, if you haven't watched part one yet, please go back and watch part one. There is a link to that in the description of this video below. And so you don't want to jump in here. You want to start at part one, do that section, and come to part two. In part one, we talked a lot about sort of the brain, its function, how our kind of mind works, how it's evolutionary designed sometimes to cause us pain and suffering, and that's a totally normal reaction. In this session, we're going to talk a bit about stress and start to get into a little bit about what acceptance and commitment therapy is and how it can be useful when trying to improve sports performance. With that being said, let's jump right into it. So let's talk a little bit about stress. So what do we mean by stress? Well, first and foremost, stress is a perfectly normal reaction of the body to some type of change, demand, or threat. The response can have a physical, emotional, or mental component. So right off the bat, one thing we need to highlight is that stress is a normal reaction, but it's also necessary. So let's take a look at this diagram here. You can see up this axis is the performance. As we move up, our performance increases, and this is sort of the level of stress. So when you're in here, this is actually a problem, right? You don't have enough stress. You have too little stress. You're considered underloaded, right? So imagine those kind of games, those situations where you go out as a hockey official, those games where you just can't get into it. You're not motivated. You're not energized. That's kind of what we mean here. Okay. That's kind of when you're in here. This is kind of that optimal zone of stress right here, right? So your performance is high. You're sort of dialed into the game. It's like you can see everything, right? All the penalties in front of you. You can see the game is kind of slowed down. You're right where you want to be. You are challenged, but not overwhelmed. This is where it gets interesting, right? When we pass over that line and we start to go into this exhausted phase. So this is when we have too much stress and we're overloaded. So we start to feel overwhelmed in this area, right? So we've reached a maximum level of stress, but now we're overwhelmed by what's happening on the ice. And so we don't see the game as well, and we get tired and those kinds of things. And then this becomes really problematic, right? This is when we start to get these more obvious signs of anxiety, panic, anger, and we can, burn out. This is extreme stress when we're just completely overwhelmed and we're just not functioning at a good level, right? So up here would be good. We start to slide down, and again, our performance is not good. So as you can see here, the neuroscience of stress, what the research shows us is that when you get into this area, right, in this red zone right here, you get decreased attention, decreased working memory, and your mind starts to wander more. And you get this change in adrenaline as well, which redirects all our energy to survival functions. So you can see what happens here. This is science. This is biology, right? When you get overwhelmed, you get decreased attention, your mind starts to wander more, you're not dialed in. And as a hockey official, this can actually become really problematic because when you're on the ice, you need to be present, you need to be focused. And so we can all remember those games that we've done where we don't feel enough stress to kind of keep us motivated. Those games where we're really dialed in and things are going really well. And those games where you just feel totally overwhelmed, you don't feel good, you get anxious, you get stressed, you don't want to be out there. And your brain behaves differently depending on our stress level. Let's show you a little bit about how the brain functions in this case. So remember in part one, we talked a little bit about the limbic system, right? So this part in the inner brain here and middle part of the brain, which kind of is responsible for our emotional reactions. So when we have something happen on the ice, right, we're watching it and we determine or we interpret this as being stressful, remember that evolutionary perspective, right? The brain tries to protect us. So we get that increased arousal level. Our heart rate goes up. our blood pressure goes up, we start to sweat, our digestion decreases. People ask me about this. Why does our digestion decrease? Your digestion decreases because in an emergency situation, you don't need to be eating. You don't need to be processing food. You don't need to be digesting food. So people will often talk about, and I've experienced this myself, when you're really stressed, people don't eat. They have no desire to eat. And that's kind of part of that fight, flight, or freeze reaction. You also get increased vigilance and decreased access to the cortex. This area up here, right? This is the part that thinks. This is the part that sort of processes information. Well, you can imagine how difficult this is when you get this high level of stress and you're not able to sort of access that thinking part of the brain that would kind of allow you to settle down quicker, right? So this is why practicing skills, which we'll talk about later, is so important so that we learn to do these kind of automatically. All right. So, a question for you. What strategies do you use to cope with anxiety or stress? So, take a minute and just think about them. Write them down if that's helpful for you as well. But take a minute to think about what do you do to manage stress when it happens in your life? Things that are going on, whether it's work or on the ice. How do you manage those things? So, in acceptance and commitment therapy, we talk about DOTS. And what do we mean by DOTS? Well, this is an acronym for the type of activities that people use to sort of deal with stress. First one, distraction, right? So, did that come on your list? Do you find yourself trying to distract yourself? So, when you feel anxious and this feeling comes over you and you feel uncomfortable, do you try to distract yourself from that, right? Because it's uncomfortable. I think we all do that from time to time. The second one we talk about is opting out. So, what do we mean by opting out? Opting out means it's an avoidance strategy. So, we opt out of activities that will cause stress. So, as a prime example, I find it difficult to serve as the head referee rather than a lines person, right? And so in games that I know I'm going to be particularly stressful or bothered, then I opt out. I avoid those games. Either I'll put them up for trade, I'll ask one of the lines persons if they would prefer to referee it. And so the question is, what does that do for me, right? So in the immediacy, I feel better, right? Because I've got all those, those nasty sort of feelings, sensations that I don't like. And the second I opt out of that activity, then I feel better temporarily. But if I wanted to referee and I wanted to get more experience in that area, it's not helping me advance, right? So the best way to deal with anxiety is actually to face it, not run away from it. As an example outside of hockey, so I was an anxious teenager. Didn't really recognize at the time. Did okay. I managed to function in that, but I did a lot of things to sort of get away from those anxious thoughts and feelings, right? So when friends of mine were going somewhere, but I wouldn't necessarily have access to a car if I wanted to go out to leave or leave a situation like that. So then I just wouldn't go. I opted out of those activities. And in retrospect, I really regret that because I think there was a lot of things that I could have done with my friends as a teenager that I really would have enjoyed had I pushed myself to do it. But in a moment, it was easier to opt out and feel better right away. So that's something that we often do to avoid feelings of anxiety. And again, this is a normal reaction. We all do this from time to time. And it's not really a problem unless it becomes, a strategy that we use very often and we turn away from the things that actually matter to us because we're being guided by our anxiety. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. The T in dots, well, that stands for thinking strategies. And when we talk about thinking strategies, we're talking about sort of any strategy we use where we're thinking about something else or thinking about how we can argue or fight or debate or use self-talk with the anxiety. So again, just to be very clear, there is nothing wrong with any of these techniques. We use them all the time. Thinking strategies, self-talk. We talk to people all the time about using self-talk. What is self-talk? Self-talk is that inner voice you have that you communicate with yourself. And we use it quite a lot. We can speak to ourselves about 350 to 1,000 words per minute, right? So we give ourselves positive messages, negative messages, neutral messages all day long. So because we are a problem, our brain is a problem-solving machine, we will start to debate ourselves. We start to feel anxious. So we start to argue with ourselves. That needs to go away. You need to go away. And you sort of debate and argue. And for low levels of anxiety, sometimes that works quite well. And so if you're doing that and it works, keep doing it. But oftentimes when our anxiety gets really high, that won't be effective, right? Because, the thoughts are there, they're so strong, and they just won't go away. And then we start to feed them more by doing more arguing with them. So that's what the T stands for, thinking strategies. The S actually stands for substances and other strategies not named already, right? So substances, medication, whether it is, an over-the-counter medication, whether it's a prescription medication to deal with anxiety, depression, these kind of stressful events, right? These are ways that we can manage anxiety. And it is a way that can be very effective, right? I've taken medication for anxiety and I have found it to be very useful most of the time, right? So it can be effective. Again, not a problem. Not advocating people here not take medication. If you meet with your physician and they prescribe it and you take it as prescribed, that's a great idea. Some people will take other substances, right? So they'll use alcohol, they'll use illegal drugs, whether it's marijuana, cocaine. Marijuana is no longer illegal, at least in Canada. Alcohol, other types of drugs, cocaine, ecstasy, crystal meth, whatever, as a way to cope. The challenge with this is that you often need more and more to get the same sensation, right? So if you take alcohol as a way to sort of calm yourself, before going into a social event or social situation, and 2 beer was enough. Well, tomorrow 2 beer is not going to do it, right? You're going to need 3, then 4, then 5, and soon, in a lot of cases, people need that substance to cope, right? And so, I've often said, sort of an aside. From an addictions perspective, I've never met someone with an addiction problem who doesn't have an underlying mental health issue. Happy, healthy people who are functioning and doing well in life don't start using crystal meth or don't start using cocaine, right? That doesn't happen. There's underlying mental health stuff that leads to the use of these drugs. And the fact is that they do have some impact and they do help in some way. But the problem is long term, they can be problematic. So, quick review. Dots, what is it? These are ways that we often try to deal with anxiety. First one being distraction. We try to distract ourselves from focusing on the anxiety. We opt out of activities, social activities, officiating activities, whatever, so that we don't have to feel anxious. Thinking strategies, right? So we talk to ourselves, we use self-talk and things like that. And finally, substances and other strategies that we didn't mention. So, alcohol, drugs, whether it's medication or just illicit drugs, as a way to kind of cope with those anxious feelings. And again, in a lot of cases for mild anxiety, this will work, right? And if it's working for you, that's fine. So here's one of the issues, though. Let me ask you, does the anxiety come back? The answer, of course, is yes. The anxiety is never completely gone, right? So, what we're going to talk about is ways that we can deal with anxiety without forcing it to go away. So, another example. So, I want you to imagine, you're getting ready to officiate a big game. Okay, so you're getting ready, you're super excited, but you're also getting kind of nervous, right? So you get that sort of feeling in your chest, that tightness in your chest, and it doesn't feel good, and you're just uncomfortable. So we're going to represent that by this ping pong ball, and for me, that's actually pretty apt, right? So sometimes when I get anxious, I get the tightness right here in my chest. You ever get that? It gets tight and it's uncomfortable. So we're going to imagine that as this is the anxiety. So what's the first thing I do when I get that feeling? Well, I don't like it, right? I want it to go away. So this paper is going to represent strategies we use to get rid of that anxiety. So the first one for me is I start to fight it, right? So I wrap I get argue. I don't like it. I start, saying this got to go away. It can't happen now. I'm getting ready to go out on the ice. Got a big game. Want to do a good job. There's a supervisor or coach in the stands watching me. This can't be happening right now. And so I really get wrapped up in that thought process and think about how I'm going to get rid of it. When that doesn't work, the next thing I do is I get angry about it, right? Because this is ridiculous. I don't like this. This is awful. This is just a terrible thing. I've been trying to fight this. I don't understand why I can't control my thoughts the way I should be able to control them. This doesn't feel good at all. And so after I've been angry for a few minutes, now I get sad, right? Because it's still there and it just won't go away. So this is sadness, right? So now all of a sudden, I'm sad about it. Like, God, why does this have to happen to me? Like, I'm the professional here. I should know better. I should be able to manage this. Like, look at the guys in the room that are with me here. No one's having this problem but me. This is all on me. This isn't fair, right? And after a couple of minutes of that, now I start to actually feel guilty, right? Like, geez, Sean, there's starving children in the world here. This is the biggest problem you have. This is a first world problem, buddy. Like, get over it. Like, your anxiety is there. Like, who are you to, want this to go away? Like, this just isn't right. So after I feel guilt about it, now I feel shame. I feel shame because of the guilt, right? So you can imagine how much time I'm spending in my head. In fact, that little ball of anxiety I had is now this. This is much bigger than a ping pong ball. And how did this happen? It happened because I've spent all of this time in my head trying to force my brain to get rid of an idea. And all I've done in the process is given it more power, right? I put all this energy into it and all this focus to it. I'm locked into this now and I'm stuck inside my head. So what if we did a different way? Let's say I didn't argue with it. Okay, I didn't argue with the anxiety. And I know I feel anxiety. I kind of feel it there, but I'm not going to argue or debate it because I'm not going to win that argument with my, limbic system of my brain. It's been around for thousands of years. Like it knows all my tricks, right? So I'm not gonna argue with it, and I'm not gonna fight with it. Because if I'm not arguing with it, then there's nothing to fight against, right? And so then if I'm not fighting with this, then I don't need to feel sad about it. And if I don't feel sad about it, then I don't need to feel guilty about it either. And of course, if I don't feel guilty about, the sadness, about the anger, about the fighting and the struggling, then I don't feel shame. And what am I left with? I'm left with that. That doesn't feel good. I don't like that. I don't want that to be there. But I'm going to take that over that big ball of energy and focus that I've now devoted myself to. Right? So what we're going to talk about here is how we can learn to live with this rather than spending all this time in our head and taking ourselves away from the things that actually matter. Because what matters to me now is I'm going on the ice and I'm going to referee a game. And I want to do well. And like I just showed you in the last few slides, if I'm wrapped up in my head and my thoughts and I'm super stressed and I'm overwhelmed, my performance is not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. So allowing this to be there is actually not a bad thing in the long run because I'm not wasting my time trying to control something. Now, the research shows us that often when we don't put the focus and energy on this, it goes away, right? It doesn't have to. Sometimes it'll pop up, sometimes it won't, but it will not have the power that that big ball had because I'm not putting the focus there. Now it's your turn to try an activity. So I'd like you to pull out a sheet of paper, any sheet of paper, any size, all good. I'll take one of these ones that I used from the last exercise here. So you have a sheet of paper. Now what I'd like you to do with this is I want you to imagine that this is all those negative thoughts and feelings that you have when you get anxious, right? The anxiety feeling, the sickness in the pit of your stomach, wanting to vomit, all that kind of stuff. Now, I'd like you to do what you would do with this normally, right? You push it away from you. So I'd like you to actually, sorry, I'll readjust my microphone here. What I'd actually like you to do now is to take that and push it out. Stretch out your arms as far as you can and push it out away from you. Okay? Put your arms out, push it out away from you, right? Because that's what we do. When we don't feel good, we want to get rid of those anxious thoughts. So the fighting, the struggling with them, we push them out. So I want you to push them out as far as you possibly can. And let's hold that there for as long as we possibly can, right? And so, like, I want you to almost like dislocate your shoulders here, right? Like, really get it out there because you want this to get as far away from you as possible. Now, beyond this paper, out beyond this paper, is all the things that are important for you. So let's go back to the example of officiating this game today, right? So you want to officiate this game, you want to do a good job. So that's what you want to focus on out there, but you're spending all of your energy trying to get this piece of paper away from you, okay? How do your arms feel? Are they tired? Do they hurt? Are you able to focus on all the other stuff beyond the paper that's important, that's valuable, that matters to you? If you got all your energy focused on keeping this paper away from you? It's not easy, is it? Because you're being pulled in a million directions. So let's try this. Take this piece of paper, and I want you to lay it in your lap. Just sit, lay it in your lap. We're not getting rid of it. We're not throwing it in the garbage. We're laying it in your lap. It is still there. Now look out around you. Do you see that game that you're ready to do? You see those family and friends that you want to hang out with? Those activities you want to be involved in? A lot easier to focus on them right now, right? Because, you know, you're not fighting and struggling with anxiety. It's still there. It's laid there. It's not that it won't pop up from time to time and try to come into our field of vision and distract us. But I'm not going to put my energy on something that ultimately I cannot control. I'm going to put my energy on the things that matter to me in spite of those feelings. Okay? It's called the pushing paper exercise that we just did there. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts on that are because I found it to be a really effective tool the first time I went through some of this material. Let's move on. Cognitive behavioral therapy looks at the relationship between your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors. And it talks about, you can see with the arrows here, that they're all linked. One links to the other and can influence the other. So let's, for example, say you have a thought, right? You have a negative thought about yourself. Well, what happens then is you tend to feel bad about yourself, and that can feed into that behavior that you exhibit, right? You tend to act out. Sometimes, the way you feel about things influence how you think about those things, which influences your behavior. Or, you behave in a certain way that causes you to feel a certain way, that causes you to think a certain way, or you behave in a certain way and you think a certain way as a result of that behavior, and that causes you to feel a certain thing. So let me give you an example from my high school days, which were not yesterday. So, I was an average kid. I wasn't super popular. I wasn't super nerdy. I was just kind of an average kid going through school. But I didn't have a lot of self-confidence. Like that's what I struggle with. And I mean, lots of teenagers do, right? So not that uncommon. But this will give you an example of sort of how the thoughts and the feelings influence behavior and then, influence our thoughts and feelings and how this is sort of this is really cyclical. So I remember I was walking down the hall one day and there was a group of popular girls up ahead of me. And I remember thinking, oh, I don't want to walk past them because they're going to make fun of me. And, I'm not going to feel good about it. And I don't want to do that. So, I have the thought that they're going to make fun of me, which causes me to feel upset and a little bit angry. Like, who are they? Are they, do they think they're better than me, et cetera, et cetera. So I walk by them and one of them says to me, "Hey, Sean." Well, you know what that means. They're being sarcastic. How could they be so nasty? Like, what did I ever do to them? And so I respond, "Look, what the hell is your problem?" And they look at me and say, "What the hell is your problem?" And I walk away and I think, yeah, see what I seen right there? That's how they behaved to me. That's how they acted towards me. This is all me, right? All they said was hi. But because I've already thought that they're going to say something nasty to me and I've had feelings about that and I'm already sort of primed to behave in a certain way, that hi was misinterpreted as something negative, which that wasn't the case at all. And as a result, I responded in a very negative way, which then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because they react to my reaction. Okay. And so what happens is this just feeds each other. So, what cognitive behavioral therapy really focuses on, if we can change the way we think about things, that can change the way we feel about them, and that can change the way we behave. And as a result of that behavior change, or thinking change, or feeling change, our world changes as a result. It's really about reframing. Let's take a look at how that's related to acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a type of cognitive behavioral therapy. What is acceptance and commitment therapy, otherwise known as ACT? By the way, it's not known as ACT. We actually call it ACT because it's about actions, it's about behavior. Okay, so that's why we call it ACT. Acceptance and commitment therapy is a type of mindful psychotherapy that helps you stay focused on the present moment and accepts thoughts and feelings without judgment. Developing psychological flexibility means that we can be more creative and responsive to situations that arise. So, this is from a book called Act Made Simple. I'll put the reference to this in the description below. This is from Dr. Russ Harris, which I talked about in part one of this workshop. So, this is what's called the triflex. Okay. So, it's about being present. So, being present in the moment, opening up, and doing what matters. So, being present, what we mean is we're focused on what's important right now and engaging in what we're doing. So when we use an example of refereeing hockey, we're not lost in our thoughts, but we're focused on the game and we're focused on the activity we're involved in right now. Opening up, it's not that we are trying to distract ourselves from those thoughts that we have. We acknowledge and we allow those thoughts and feelings to take place. It's not about liking them, right? We're not saying you have to like them. We're just saying we acknowledge that they're there and we're going to look at them from a non-judgmental perspective. And we're going to do what matters, right? We're going to act effectively, guided by the things that are important to us. So we're going to be guided by our values, not by our thoughts in our head, which may or may not be helpful. All right, we have reached the end of part two of this workshop. I know, time flies by. You just love listening to the sound of my voice, don't you? So in part three, we're going to talk a little bit about more of the techniques around ACT, and we're going to do more practice. So we're going to talk about ways that we can actually get out of our head and untangle from thoughts that are not helpful and focus on the values and things that matter. So we're going to talk a little bit about our values and our goals and ways that we can sort of untangle from those thoughts. So you should see a link below that will take you to part three. So you don't have to jump there right away. Take some time, go back, process a little bit about what we've talked about here, and then move on to part three. Talk to you soon.